Hey, what's up guys? My Hero Deku here. Today I wanted to talk about a series I don't really see much discussion on, and it's kind of a shame because it's really good. Let's get into the review of Acca 13. Now right off the bat, I think the premise of Acca 13 is really interesting on its own. We follow our main character, Jean Otis, a member of the inspection department of Acca, the organization tasked with regulating and inspecting the 13 districts and maintaining order within the kingdom, because the Doa Kingdom has for the past couple hundred years or so been in complete peace and stability, but acting as almost 13 separate nations, and an alliance more so than an actual nation. Now, it's all worked because the king is peaceful and Acca helps regulate the people, working together. But the prince, who threatens to take over after this king, who is now 100 years old, wants to disband Acca. This would be why we start to see rumors and speculation circulate between the higher-ups of both the Dowa Kingdom itself and Acca, the Jin, in the inspection department, who is tasked with journeying between each nation, might be more than meets the eye and might be helping to plan a coup. Now, the thing that I find intriguing about the story is while it sounds interesting on its own, the story doesn't rely on that to keep you invested. It's consistently setting up and taking intricate elements of each and using the characters to push them forward. Of course, we see Jian from the start traveling between these places. He leaves on his first trip within the very first episode. However, we get bits and pieces that will come into play later. For example, within that episode, we see him receive a cigarette from the higher-up. We see these rumors speculate. We see Chief Officer Grossler, the main officer in opposition, we assume at the time, speaking on how they need to not disband them, to keep a closer eye on Jean and what might be happening within the kingdom. Now, what's interesting about this is it all of course comes to light later on, that Jean is in fact of royal blood, and that is why he was picked for the coup. He had no chance and no involvement in planning it, but of course ends up involved with Chief Officer Grossler, as well as the other nations using him as that intermediary before he even knows it, the District General, and as well as, most importantly, Chief Officer Lilium. Now, of course, what's most interesting about that is we naturally know that Chief Officer Lilium was set up as someone on Jean's side to start with, first introducing him to Jean at the royal party, celebrating Prince Schwann's coming of age. Now, he addresses there that Chief Officer Grossler might be using him, and there might be a reason for the coup. What this does is kind of shows that Chief Officer Lilium is just working to sabotage Jean's perception, but also that they're hinting at that royal blood, which he of course knew about at the time. We'll find out later on. And there's also the facts of Nino taking pictures of him next to royalty, the hinting of them both liking the sandwich bread and sweets, him being Jean and his sister Lotta, that we see the king show a love for. So all these little bits of foreshadowing and world building that we see in the first 8 or so episodes that pay off in those last few episodes, because of course we start to get the reveal of that royalty that we just discussed, as well as see Lilium and Chief Officer Grossler were planning this coup all along, and that's why they've disagreed the entire time. It's these elements that have been built upon and foreshadowed that I think are really interesting, because all those details that you may not have paid attention to when you were watching earlier, such as the distinct aspects of each of the 13 districts, start to come back up, including the relationship Jean has with the different district chiefs, as he receives those cigarettes, which he originally thought was because he was traveling these magazines, but in fact was a symbol of a district's willingness to participate with the coup. The payoff on this was incredibly huge, and it leaves you kind of wondering what's going to happen from there, because a lot of it you don't really see coming, but you're starting to pay more attention. Now, of course, it's kind of one of the more obvious twists at this point, that Lilium, like I said, turns out to be the bad guy and turns on them, wanting to prove superiority of the Furwa district, which he is in charge of along with his family. So they try and capitalize on the situation and use Jean to kind of control the throne. Of course, Jean has different plans, as instead of using Acca's 100-year celebration to kill the prince and try and get him to relinquish his throne, if not, they instead surround him and use it as a demonstration for why Acca is necessary to him, which he proceeds to agree to. Obviously, this angers Lilium, but we see him storm off and peace kind of remain in the nation, although they do have to go down to 12. The name Acca 13 remaining in Acca because they expect them to come back. It's this kind of willingness and looking for peace that I found really interesting because it shows something that they've said the royal family embodied all along. And in the end, it seems like Jean, even though he's not going to be the king, is the one who represents that royal family and that royal trait the most, because in the end, he was the one willing to give up the chance at power and the chance at the royal throne himself in hopes of making sure the kingdom is safe. Overall, I think it's a really engaging story and a very high aspect I'd have to rate for this anime. I don't want to say it's one of the best I've ever seen in anime, but it's definitely one of the most unique and interesting, and it's exceptional in its execution. Of course, story isn't the only thing important in anime, so let's talk about the characters. Now, most of the characters in this series, I will admit, feel a bit more like plot devices than they do actual characters and real people that you could see, with the exception of those like Jin, Lata, and Nino, the most important three in my opinion. Jean kind of comes off as this calm and collected guy, almost too much so sometimes, in the sense that I don't really feel like any real person could remain calm in some of these situations he does. Of course, it being an anime, that isn't too much of a nitpick, and it's interesting to see unfold, as well as Nino's relationship with him as we see. In fact, although Jean thinks they've known each other for 15 years, Nino addresses within the first few episodes that it's been 30. It was probably one of the most interesting characters to see develop with him because Nino has been watching Jean for so long. When it becomes unnecessary for him to do so, him coming to terms with the fact that they might actually be friends and he might have a connection with these people beyond just this being my job is something that I think was a shining moment in the series' character development and showing that these characters might just be more than plot devices to push that coup d'etat and royal agenda forward, which was really nice. Of course, Lata being the last example I mentioned, she is interesting to watch as well, because she really does feel the most out of the three, like she's pushing the plot forward, and that's why she's there, with things like her love for sweets, and her being just like the woman in the painting that we see of the dead relative from the royal family. But that being said, she still manages to remain this sense of charm as she kind of takes this independent role in trying to help out both Nino and Jean, being close to them like family, as well as obviously being family with Jean. Of course, there are other side characters like Chief Officer Grossler, who we see some kind of development for in the later episodes, discussing that his kind of pushing for a revolution was backed by his feelings that the districts were all more separate than one complete unit. We see some growth there as at the end he says when he looks out into the crowd he instead now sees the different uniforms as a sign of unity when he once saw it as a sign of difference, which was nice to see, as well as the district general. She was very interesting to watch just because of the prominent role she put herself in planning the whole coup, but I would have liked to see some of those characters fleshed out more. In particular with Lilium. A lot of the growth we saw from Lilium was less growth and more just subtle foreshadowing, like I mentioned with the shadow. You'll notice when you watch back the series and watch some of the stuff in the opening, we never really see Lilium look anyone in the eye or be direct with them, and we constantly got those little like smirks of dishonesty that you might not have noticed on the first watch, which was interesting to see, but again, felt a little direct. I mean, with anime being a visual medium, it's important to have those things, but I would have definitely liked to see some more personal growth and personal reasoning behind why Lilium wanted to take over with the Furawa district and prove their superiority outside of just resources ours, that's it. But naturally, that being said, these aren't really too big of nitpicks. I'm obviously taking the worst aspects when addressing that, and I rather enjoyed them as an ensemble on the whole. Not addressing side characters like Prince Schwan and Nina's father that weren't as important. Those characters were obviously used to build up these characters instead of maybe necessarily foreshadow those plot elements like I've said these characters have. That being said, it's just something to address, as I definitely think the story is the strong point of this anime and the characters take a backseat. Although I do really like some of them, I think they could have been addressed a little bit more outside of the story. I don't see any of them thriving as much outside of this specific series. Now, of course, ignoring what I said about visual cues earlier, it's always important when you're looking at if you want to watch an anime, what you think of the art style and animation. I don't really think the animation is particularly special, though there is a lot of care put into aspects like Jin's smoking as well as his hair, which I'll put up on screen for a few seconds now. I do want to point out and address how good the art is in this series. While it might not be everyone's cup of tea, it kind of maintains that late 70s, early 80s feel of anime in terms of art style, but having a more modern coloring palette. I think it was really interesting to look at, and in particular, a lot of the backgrounds on these different districts really gave those districts a lot of character, which is important when the whole series story is based around how different these districts are. I think the art definitely works to improve this series and make it stand out, even outside of the unique premise, because it definitely just doesn't look like anything else I've seen. Like I said, I should have a few images on the screen right now just for you to take a look for yourself, but I have absolutely no complaints with it. Now, the last thing to address is kind of some of the voice acting and sound performances in this series. I'm not really adequately equipped to address some of this stuff too heavily, but I do want to give some special mentions to Jean and Nino's voice actors, who do a very good job of portraying the characters, I might say, with Jean kind of keeping that cool demeanor without sounding just soulless the whole time, which I found incredibly impressive. I haven't really tried anything like that myself, obviously, but I don't really think it'd be easy to kind of keep that sense of emotion behind it while still keeping the calm and laid back attitude that this voice actor managed. Same goes with Nino in terms of just fitting the character. I feel like the deeper voice kind of helped to, and gruff sound kind of helped to allude to how much older than Jean Nino was. Those were the two standout performances for me though. Now, sound, on the other hand, I think the music fit each scene exceptionally well. I don't have too much to say, but it had a kind of a theme that really fit that art I was talking about, as well as just the general tone of the series. And the opening is something that definitely excelled. You're not going to want to skip it, personally speaking, I don't think, and I know a lot of friends who agreed. Shout out to you, Schultz. So overall, I think the sound was really solid. Now, just kind of wrapping up here, I know I've been a little critical of some aspects of this series, but you might notice I have a lot of good things to say about Acca. I actually went back and rewatched the series to make this review, so I really made sure I did it justice with how involved I felt like the story and characters were. And I've got to say, I wasn't disappointed. I actually upped the score from a 9 to a 10 on MyAnimeList, which I rate based on enjoyment, not on objectivity. There's a reason I don't give a number here usually. But I just bring that up to express just how good I thought the series was for me personally. And if you thought any of these good aspects I mentioned in this review were something that appealed to you, I would definitely recommend checking the series out because it's an incredibly solid experience and very much worth watching. I know a lot of spoilers might be addressed here, but even if you don't necessarily feel like it's your cup of tea, I would probably give the first episode a watch before you say that for sure. Anyways, guys, this has been My Hero Deku. I can't promise a video next week, obviously, but I'll be back.